Well, hello everybody, Phil here from Desperado 2, and it's a windy kind of cold day in Florida today, so I thought I'm continuing my work on my electrical, and I thought I would go over it. I'm only partway through it, but I want to go over how I'm putting in a lithium iron phosphate battery. And this video might get a little long. There's nothing really exciting here, but if you are installing lithium ion on your sailboat, this may help you. I did make this video once before, but I wasn't 100% happy with it, so I'm going to try to be a little clearer and keep my train of thought a little better, because I do these in one take. I do not edit them ever. Okay, everything right now, look at this rat's nest of wiring, but what I'm doing is I'm replacing a ton of old wires. And, you know, just to give you an example, like this old stiff wire, you know, everything's getting replaced with new cables. I'm putting in terminal blocks and basically going through each wire, replacing it, and then I'm going to tie wrap everything up and get it all organized. But I want to go through what I'm doing. So I used to have 4 golf cart batteries in that ugly compartment back there, which I am, of course, is now empty, but I'm going to be cleaning that up and painting it. So I had 4 6-volt batteries, you can call them golf cart batteries, which gave me 200 amp hours of lead acid house bank battery time. Now, with lead acid, the moment you deplete your battery up like 50%, you're really damaging your battery. So really, you only have 100 amp hours of usable energy. I am replacing those 4 that were in there with this little guy. This is a lithium iron phosphate battery. This is 202 amp hours or 2.6 kilowatts. It in effect replaces 8 of the batteries that were in there. So it's going to be double what I had in there, just this little box. It only weighs 47 pounds. And I'm really excited about it. Now, the nice thing about lithium ion is you can use 80 to 90% of them. They have an internal battery management system in them, what they call a BMS. So they shut down before you start damaging the cells. This one came with a 10-year warranty, and it's good for 5,000 cycles, whereas lead acid, you're replacing every couple of years. Something's a little different. You don't have battery terminals anymore. This uses a plug-in Anderson connector. It's nice it has an on-off switch and, of course, a voltmeter. This one also has a built-in 300 amp fuse, which is, you know, just kind of a nice thing to have. And like I said, it comes with these nice handles, and yeah, I'm going to have a lot of extra room in there once I get her cleaned up and get this installed. Now, if you're going to put lithium ion in your boat, and that's why I do this, is for people working on their sailboats, you can't just drop in a battery. Well, you can, but you're going to damage it, fry your alternator. You really shouldn't, okay? So I'm going to go over how I'm hooking it up, how I can charge it, and just some of the things that I have had to change in order to install this battery, because I am still keeping a lead acid starter battery, which is right here. Pardon my mess, but okay, so what happens? This is going to be my entire house bank. It's only being charged off of the solar. Now I have 660 watts of solar on the boat, ran in series. Okay, now when I say ran in series, and it's a real cloudy day today, but as you can see here, there's 69.2 volts coming from the solar panels. All right, now that then in turn goes to an MPPT controller, which is here. All right, that little screen I just showed you is just the relay of what this thing does. It's just hard to read in the cabinet. And then this will charge the lithium battery. Now, you have to set up the controls on this to charge a lithium battery, because you can either set it for lead acid, AGM, or lithium, and you have to go through the specs of the battery and put it in. It's not very hard at all, but you just change this to say it's now charging a lithium battery. Okay, now what about when you're running the engine? Well, when you're running the engine, you can't just have the alternator charge this thing. This will take more amperage than your alternator can give it. And unless you're running your alternator at anything, like unless your engine's at full throttle, where the fan inside the alternator would cool down the alternator, your alternator will overheat and burn out. So you cannot charge this directly from your alternator. Again, there's exceptions to this. If you have a Balmar alternator, you know, which has, you know, a regulator in it, what have you. But generally, you cannot just hook this up directly the way your normal house bank used to be. Now, most boats used to have a battery combiner, which is this unit. So your alternator would normally charge your starter battery first. When your starter battery is full, then it would take the excess energy from the alternator and send it to your house bank. Can't do that anymore either because, again, you'd be connecting this directly to your alternator. So we had to overcome that. The way we've decided to do it, sorry, the way I've decided to do it, yeah, you can see I'm adding terminal blocks and stuff too. And the reason I'm doing this is just to start getting everything organized, to clean up this. So I have separate terminal blocks for the house bank. These are going to be for the starter bank. Now, sorry, see, this is how I lose my train of thought. How do we charge this from the alternator when the engine's running? We have a DC to DC charger. Now, there's many different models of this. I decided to go with a 40 amp DC to DC charger. What it does is it limits the draw to 40 amps. So you'll be charging this at 40 amps off of your starter battery, which is fine because this is a lead acid battery. So you're fine hooking this up directly to your alternator just as it normally is. So we ran 2 wires off of, again, and these are not 100% cleaned up yet. So we run 2 wires directly off of our starter battery into the DC to DC charger. Then we take 2 lines out of the DC to DC charger. They actually go to the terminal blocks down here. In effect, they're charging this. 40 amps. So the maximum draw you're going to have on your alternator is 40 amps. Now, I have an 80 amp alternator on this boat. You can get these in 20 amp model and also a 50 amp model. Now, in my last video, I didn't make a mistake, but I didn't say it clearly enough. There is a model of, I think it's by Renology, where it allows you to combine everything together. And you're like, oh, that would be easy. You could just put it acts as your MPPT. You can just put your solar into it, your alternator lines into it, your house bank into it, your starter bank into it. The problem I found with that when reading the specs is the maximum solar voltage input was 25 volts. Now, you're going, well, I only need 12 to charge, or 14.4 to charge my batteries. Well, remember I showed you we're actually charging, well, we're not charging. We are actually getting 69.4 volts from our solar panels, and that's because they're hooked up in series. So when you're hooked up in series, you're going to get a higher voltage, and you need thinner wire, and it's easier to hook up your solar panels. If you were to get that unit that has a 25 volt maximum input, if you had 1 panel, that's fine, but if you have 2 panels, you're going to actually have to hook them up in parallel. And you'd need to get some heavier wire possibly. So just remember, if you're thinking that other unit is the end-all be-all, it is going to give you some limitations on how you can hook up your solar panels. All right, so that's not the unit I went with. Okay, I'm using a separate MPPT. I've taken out my battery combiner. Everything's fused separately, so I have breakers and then another 300 amp fuse there. That is actually for the inverter. Now, one of the problems I had is this unit, again, there's some, I call them dip switches, some people call them DIP switches. You have to set them up to let them know that it's actually going to be charging a lithium battery as well. So it comes with a little instruction manual, which is pretty much unreadable. But if you go online, you can find how to set those dip switches. But also, you have to turn this unit on. Now, in order to turn it on, you have to have I call it a tripwire, but you have to get a 12 volt signal to it. Now, some people just want to put a switch in there, which is fine, but if you forget to turn the switch off, you could actually be draining your starter battery when your motor's not running, and you don't want to do that either. So I have this wire running through, my engine compartment is also going to be cleaned up, running through here, and it actually connects to my oil pressure sensor. And why do I have it there? Well, I don't want, as soon as I turn my key switch on my Yanmar to start the motor, to be starting the motor and also drawing an immediate 40 amps off the battery. I'd like the motor to be up and running for a second. So this 12 volt signal will only be there once the oil pressure in the engine is raised up. So you have that little beeping noise, when you turn your key to the first position. As soon as your engine starts and the oil pressure comes up, that beeping, the oil pressure light turns off, which then gives me a 12 volt signal to turn this on. Okay, so that's the reason I've hooked it up that way. I also should mention that there are only two things that the starter battery runs off. The starter battery obviously starts hooked up to the starter motor and the alternator. But I also run the windlass off of this. And the reason I run the windlass off of this is the windlass is the kind of that other high draw item on the boat. And generally when you're anchoring or pulling anchor, your motor's running anyway. So it's perfect. Your starter battery is perfect for running that. Okay, so, you know, I personally think it's the best way to hook up anything that's a really high draw. Now, meanwhile, this will run our water maker, our radar, our instruments, our house bank, our inverter for which gives us 110 volts for our laptops. Okay, so I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover clearly. If you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I know a lot of sailors, you know, if you ask 10 sailors 10 questions, you're going to get 12 opinions. I think that I've tried to cover the basics here, and I would like to go into it in more detail, individual parts of it. I've had this system hooked up for about 3 weeks now, and I'm pretty happy with it. Everything's functioning correctly, so I'm now ready to start cleaning up, putting everything back together, finish upgrading some of this wiring, put in these extra terminal blocks. Just a couple other real quick questions. Most of you have this switch, which is your battery combiner switch. Okay. You want to be careful that you do not... I like this switch because it only has on and combine, and it has the combine kind of in yellow, caution, and you really never want to put your switch into that position. It's an emergency only position. And when you switch this will in effect connect the lithium to the starter battery. So really, you're only going to do that in a real pinch if you really have a problem. But otherwise, you want to keep these two things absolutely separate. One thing I chose not to do was because I rarely ever plug in. I don't go to marinas. I decided that really I don't need this thing to be charging when I'm at shore power. I have plenty of solar energy to charge it, so this battery charger here is pretty much redundant now. So it may come out. All right, folks, take care. Have a great day. This is Phil from Desperado 2. I'm in Florida. I am all gripping my paint. In fact, I'm actually using a new product this time called Alex Seal, and I'll let you know how that comes out. You probably know I love all grip, and I've been using it on most of my boats. I've also finished the bottom job, and I'm hoping to be splashed in the water in 2 weeks. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.